The Reverend Dr. David Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I want to take a few minutes at the start to respond to a couple of the speeches that have happened so far in this debate. Mr. Lotuinga right now has failed to give the assurance that we sought that that the money from this bill would be put back into public health. He has talked about meeting inflation pressures. He just said more surgery, as though that was public health, as though that was actually addressing those drivers of cost in the sector that we all know about that have such significant social consequences. The member clearly doesn't really understand the issue, and that is frightening because this is the minister responsible for introducing this bill. He doesn't seem to know what he is doing on this topic. He was not able to give the assurance, and he thinks he has, which is the frightening thing when we're in this House and he is the minister responsible for this legislation. We've seen from Mr. Brownlee various conspiracy theories, including that the scientists and academics who speak out on this topic have a vested interest, and that the scientists and academics who speak out on it somehow won't have a job because the government's being so successful in this regard, and therefore they're against the government because of the government's success. I suspect he's probably got another theory about the man on the moon and a few other things. But frankly, this claim just doesn't stack up, Mr. Speaker. I don't think anyone in this House believes there's a great conspiracy amongst the lethal left-wing academics out there to try and criticise the government because they're so successful. Mr. Speaker, the claim is ludicrous. It was an entertaining speech from Mr. Brownlee, but that's not really why we're here. We are here to actually put through a measure that will make a real difference. And we will be supporting this measure because putting an excise tax in place does make a real difference. We know that in terms of smoking cessation. But we also know that what the academics say is right, that the 2025 target is a pipe dream without other measures. That if that money is not put into smoking cessation programs, if it's not put into quit lines, the devices that help people quit and so on, it simply won't be achieved. The 2025 target will not be achieved. Another interesting thing that I've learned in my research recently is that the behaviour of tobacco companies, when they're given a lead in time, like they've been given in this legislation, is to push the costs onto premium products rather than gateway products. And I seek an assurance from the minister that he will be looking to ensure that this tax is covering all tobacco products in an even way across the market. And I look across the House and hope the minister is able to give that assurance in his next address, because otherwise what we're doing is simply putting a whole lot of excise tax onto the luxury cigars that people for whom money is no object buy, and not on the gateway products, those cheap cigarettes that first-time smokers use. So I'd like an assurance from the minister. He may be able to give this assurance that it will be applied evenly across all products. Why we need such a lead in time is not clear to me. If it is so that tobacco companies can reorganise their affairs so they'll be minimally affected by this, I would be disgusted, and I think every other member of this House would be disgusted to learn that, Mr. Speaker. So I want the minister to consider again, perhaps have a look up what public health actually is, and see whether he can't give an assurance that this money will actually go into those things that would help us achieve the 2025 quitting target. And Mr. Seymour, of course, I was called away on urgent public business and was very disappointed to miss his response, because I was looking forward to the tortured explanation he was going to give about why he doesn't support this measure at all but is going to vote for it in the debate in support of the government. I think from colleagues who were in the House who have briefed me, the basic logic was that it was a failed measure that won't work, but he'll support it because it's a budget measure, which equates to he'll support it because it means he'll get a quid pro quo. He'll get some corporate welfare out of it. He'll get to put in another charter school that's funded at 5 times the rate of our public schools. I think that's why that member's supporting it in this House. He speaks about nothing but corporate welfare, that man, the man from ACT. He has a stance that the government should spend less money, but when it comes to his mates, they should spend more money. It's unfathomable how he can stand up and say that and really do it without breaking down into some kind of, I don't know, self-immolating or something, that something strange doesn't happen in that kind of circumstance, because it is a very, very tortured logic, and something, though, he seems to be perfecting. But I will look forward, no doubt he'll speak further in the debate, and we'll hear more about this tortured logic as to why he should support it, even though he opposes the whole idea. Mr. Speaker, that's what we've got here in this House, because actually this government has very few principles. We can see that in what it's doing. It is treating this as a revenue grab. It is a good measure. We'll support it for that reason, but it is not putting it back into the public health care that this country needs. The Minister is not prepared to give a cast iron guarantee that this money will not go into flag projects. You know, let's have another flag referendum. They're not able to give a cast iron guarantee that they won't do another deal like the Excise City deal, which was, again, another form of corporate welfare, where they handed money hand over fist because they did a bad deal behind closed doors that the Auditor General criticised. They can't give a cast iron guarantee they're not going to do another Saudi sheep deal where they're giving money to Saudi businessmen and providing documentation and advice out of New Zealand government agencies that won't be even released to the New Zealand public. They'll be bailing out someone else, MediaWorks, who knows what next. That's what they do. That's what they do. And they will not give a guarantee that this money won't go to those kinds of causes. That's what they do, sadly, Mr. Speaker. So we want to see, of course, that money go into public health. We are concerned, of course, across the budget, where we've seen this healthcare underfunding issue continue. So 1.7 billion in underfunding using Treasury figures and analysis from Infometrics, independent analysis that shows with rising inflation and cost pressures, you need to put more money into health each year. They have underfunded over the last 6 years by 1.7 billion. It is no wonder that New Zealanders are missing out on the services that they require. And we've seen in the latest round that there are 15 DHBs that won't receive enough money to meet the funding pressures. And the real losers in this round are Canterbury, which will be 33 million underfunded, Waitemata, 27 million underfunded, and Counties Manukau, 18 million underfunded in this round. But there are 15 DHBs which won't be funded for cost pressures again this budget. Of course, it's a bit more than they've put in previous budgets. They want the DHBs to get closer to their targets this year coming because it's election year. No surprises there. The government is putting a bit of lipstick on for election year. They want the DHBs to have smaller deficits. They want one or two to even reach surplus. They're dressing it up for election year. This is the year they've decided to put a little bit more into health. But it won't be enough to meet all those cuts that have already been made. We know that. We know that, Mr. Speaker.
Back to this.
And so back to the issue at hand in terms of whether this measure is bringing in money for the general pot to be spent on flag referendums and so on, or Sky City deals, or whether it's being spent on public health as it should be. Unfortunately, the Minister has been able to give us absolutely no assurances whatsoever in that regard, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when tobacco companies get that lead-in time, as I mentioned earlier, they adjust the range of their products on the market. So I do look forward to the Minister's assurance that the excise tax will be spread across all products, not just across different providers in the market, but that across the individual products, so they can't rearrange their ranges to maximise their profits, to keep the gateway products cheaper, so that they apply the tax to the luxury products at the top of their market. We know that's their behaviour. They've got two tobacco lobbyists in their government, former tobacco lobbyists, and they will certainly know the answers if the Minister doesn't have that answer at the top of his head. I wonder why they haven't taken stronger measures on smoking cessation. Perhaps the answer does lie in the fact that they have two former tobacco lobbyists amongst their number. They will be certainly defending the interests of the industry as they understand it, Mr. Speaker. This government has failed to deliver on health for New Zealanders. Middle New Zealand is missing out. They seem much more interested in the interests of a very wealthy few at the top, Mr. Speaker, and when it comes to this measure,
get back to the bill.
It seems to be money coming in, as I said, Mr. Speaker, money coming in so they can dangle tax cuts next year, money coming in that they can't assure us is going to be spent on public health measures, Mr. Speaker. We'll support it because it is one of the most effective things that can be done to help smoking cessation, but they're not on track to meet their 2025 target. That's what the specialists say. They need to put more in play if they're really serious about achieving that goal.
Mr. Speaker.